Well, that's a
Okay.
great prop to have for this next Shacknews Award, which is Best PS4 Game of 2020, Greg. I'm guessing you have a nomination with your
I do.
giant ass sword?
I do. Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Oh, it's a good game.
It's pretty
It's
great.
really
And coming from a guy who never really saw the fuss about Final Fantasy VII, like I was never into the original. I never really got into that whole world. My God, does this thing just like throw you in? It's just like awesome from start to finish. Holy crap! The level of detail they put into that world and into the combat and into those characters, like I want so much more of that. And I was actually like, I was both disappointed and excited when I got to the end of the game and it's like, wait, this isn't the whole story? How much story is left? Oh, there's that much? Cool, there's gonna be more of this.
Yeah,
I
I'm
definitely
coming
want so
from
much more of
the
this.
I'm coming from the same position. We talked about this a little bit in a previous segment, but I completely missed Final Fantasy VII back in the day. I think I dabbled in a demo on PC, maybe. But I was really looking forward to this remake as someone who went in with no baggage, went in with no expectations of what this needed to do or shouldn't do. To kind of expand on Ozzy's point, one thing I didn't realize until I put some time into it and then took some more time to just kind of read up on the differences was how fleshed out the characters are, besides kind of the big three, or I guess four, Cloud, Tifa, Aerith or Eris, and Barrett. And I just like that you're part of a squad that you feel this instant bond to, or not even instant. I mean, it is instant because right from the beginning of the game, I think, to agree with Ozzy, like they throw you right in. It has one of the best starts to a game I've played in a long time.
Just Cloud riding in on a train. It's just like such a cool visual.
Just that, but also like I would compare it to another PS4 game that I'm sure Blake is going to bring up in a little bit here, but just like right away you kind of get a sense of where these characters fit in, how they complement each other. I thought the intro chapter especially did a great job of introducing all these complex mechanics so that I'm really excited to get deeper into battles and really pick this turn-based real-time system hybrid apart. And I'm really enjoying the story so far, which, to be honest, is not something I usually say about JRPGs in general. I used to play JRPGs as a kid because I loved the combat systems. And then over time, they kind of grew more linear, and I just sort of fell out of them in favor of more non-authorial agency in games. So I'm just really digging Final Fantasy VII Remake so far. I haven't finished it yet. I've played several hours, and I'm just having a blast with it.
Oh, it's an awesome game. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It was like
this is a stacked category.
Square Enix.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, Square Enix knew that they had to nail it. Like they couldn't blow it with this one. And like a lot of you, like I kind of like the first Final Fantasy VII came out at a time in my life where it's not like I could really afford to get a PlayStation or a new game or anything like that. And I also kind of had that vibe, like, you know, when your band you like gets famous and everybody's listening to their new album and telling you about it, and you've been listening to them for years, and you kind of you're like, oh, they freaking sell. It's like, you know, it feels like a sell. That's kind of how Final Fantasy VII was. Like, I loved the SNES games, and then having everybody tell me about the Final Fantasy series and how much they loved it after like I'd been repping it for years. It was just kind of like, man, screw you guys. I'm going home.
But your Final Fantasy hipster bullshit aside, Final Fantasy VII was still a pretty good game at the time.
Totally.
Although I can imagine.
I'm talking about like I was like what 13.
Although I can
14.
imagine like Blake being chapped and like people going to be like, man, have you played Final Fantasy 9? Have you played Final Fantasy 15? You'd be like, dude, I was on 7. 4 was cool, you know?
Or
Yeah,
3.
3. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, no, it was weird, especially after like getting picked on for being a video game nerd, like, you know, and then have like video games really went mainstream like when I was like going into high school and stuff like that. So then all of a sudden everyone was into them and I wasn't so nerdy. So maybe there's some bitterness there, but that's like years ago. I don't do dumb shit like that anymore. But it was a real treat, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't play it originally, because this is I feel like this is a way better way to experience it. Honestly, it's just the artwork, the music, the characters.
I don't know. At the time, Final Fantasy VII was.
I hated those polygons, man. I hated those.
Okay,
like,
but it was
characters.
still
was-
pretty
yeah, like,
damn revolutionary in the scope.
I got-
Yeah,
I gotta
but it
say-
seemed like a step back to me. It
So,
seemed like a step back to me.
To
from,
Blake's
like,
point, I actually wrote a feature on Final Fantasy VII's marketing campaign some years ago, and everyone from Sony and Square Enix US I talked to said, like, there's a reason we focused on the cinematics in that game, is because even Square knew, like, you know, in terms of polygons, the characters look a little rough, but that it was made up for by like the scope of that world and what they were able to do with cinematics. That was really, like, when you think about it, Sony was gaining ground on Nintendo at the time, but then Final Fantasy VII came out, this multi-disc epic with these jaw-dropping cinematics that made people go, oh, this is what CD-ROMs can do versus cartridge. Also, it doesn't cost like $90. It's like $40 or $50. So I think there's some merit to that, and it's certainly hard to.
Did you see the overworld in the original Final Fantasy?
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's not like these games were always founded on like the best graphics or anything. Like, especially the non-battle scenes.
And I mean,
No,
like,
you're absolutely right. I'm talking about like Final Fantasy VII specifically. Like, there was this big concentration, even in the gaming magazines. I don't know if you remember, but the ads were super aggressive. Like Sony calling out Nintendo, like, "Oh, we talked to our artists, and they said this was impossible to put on a cartridge." And it was just this focus on how far games had come as kind of a medium and an art form.
It was also a falling out of Square with Nintendo.
Oh
And
yeah, they
Sony
wanted to
with
publicly just go at Nintendo.
Yeah, the SNES CD is what ended up being the PlayStation to begin with, and you got to believe that if SNES CD came out, that Final Fantasy VII probably would have been a launch title for that platform. So I think there was a lot of intercompany beef.
Yeah, there was.
That came through in that marketing campaign, no question. And it was Sony trying to be a key differentiator. And boy, that game was it was different. You couldn't do that on N64.
That was like, you point to that and then you go, that's PlayStation right there.
Yeah, I mean, speaking as someone who played both versions of the game all the way through, like the original and the remake, like, speaking to David's point, like Final Fantasy VI, the game immediately before it, starts off with a very long sort of diatribe of the mechs walking towards the city, and this long like setup expository story like scrolling across the screen. Final Fantasy VII is like the original. It started as like a sort of roller coaster of like, you see these characters like, holy shit, it's full-size characters, because leading up to that they always had like the pint-sized characters with sort of like embellished aspects of them. So Final Fantasy VII like starts off with that cutscene, and then the Cloud jumps off the train and it's like, oh man, they're back to stubby polygons. And then you get into your first battle immediately, it's like, holy shit, they're full-size mans again. Is this good? And like you get that, it was interesting at the time, and I think Final Fantasy VII Remake expands upon that properly by like taking what was good about the original and those impacts and like stretching them out all the more by like, it's so seamless.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, the whole thing plays, it looks like a cinematic the whole time.
Like you don't wash away into a battle screen. The battle just happens where you're standing, and that was kind of like, wow, there's like not going to be any sort of transitions throughout the rest of this remake. It's just going to be wherever I'm standing is where the battle's going to be happening. And that was like that was like the moment of like, this is expanded upon what I've seen before for Final Fantasy VII Remake, is when you realize that this whole experience is going to be seamless for the most part, without all these like washes to another sort of thing that they have to do in order to put the experience in front of you and make it work.
Yeah, and I think that, like, TJ, I'm glad you weighed in, because I think like the sum total of our argument speaks to the fact that this is that rare game that, with some exceptions, such as how Greg feels about the ending, By and large, this game pleased newcomers and fans of the original, who kind of wanted to play a remake that looked like the game they remembered rather than the way the game they remembered actually looked. It just feels like a natural evolution and an upgrade in almost every way.
Yeah, and what they've done with like expanding like storylines of like, you know, kind of tertiary characters. To Ozzy's point, that's a full game. Like Final Fantasy VII Remake, that's a big ass game.
Yeah.
And that's a third of the original.
And it doesn't feel like, this is episode 1. I have to wait for part 2. Like,
yeah, it feels like a complete
I mean, is it really even a third of the original story, though?
It's like a sixth of the original. Because you get out of the...
It's about a third or a fourth. Like, it's not...
Plus a lot more, right? They added a ton of content.
That's what I mean.
Yes.
Like, they took what would have been, you know, hours, you know, maybe 8 hours, and they turned it into like a 40-hour game experience, you know, like that expansion is what I'm talking about. That's that detail that they added.
We're all going to be senior citizens by the time we get Final Fantasy Remake Part 5 or 6.
Social Security will have been,
I think I'm gonna
be bankrupt by the time Final Fantasy VII Remake is done.
We're going to be playing the finale on our deathbeds. That's probably what's going to happen is we're going to finish the remake and then die. Yeah. Like someone's going to be like, Gam beat Final Fantasy, and then he just went to sleep and he never woke up. That's gonna be how we end the Final Fantasy VII Remake.
It will be the Final Fantasy,
and then we'll hear in the background that they're doing it for 8, 9, and 10, and we'll suddenly like.
I still maintain.
Oh God!
I maintain that it is the worst name of a franchise ever. Because.
But yeah,
we're up to 16 of these now.
It's an oxymoron for sure.
It started out as the Final Fantasy, like that was a Hail Mary.
and
it worked. Yeah,
they were like, we might actually be able to ship this game. Oh, we did. It's the Final Fantasy. And then they're like,
well, shit.
I guess we're gonna call it 2.
But the way that they've evolved this game from where the original was, while also accepting faithful elements of it into the formula, is good. And I say that as somebody who very much enjoyed Final Fantasy 15. I really like the wide open journey of that game, and I like the combat system for what it is. But like, I also like being able to control my other party members in Final Fantasy 7. That's a huge part of like the experience, is being able to use being able to not just use Cloud, but being able to do things with Tifa, being able to do things with Barrett, being able to do things with Aerith. I think it would have been really disappointing if Final Fantasy 15's combat system came in 1-to-1 for Final Fantasy 7 and you just controlled Cloud. Because people did have that issue where a certain character in Final Fantasy 7 Remake can only be used as a support character. And for lack of spoilers, it is kind of disappointing, but also makes sense knowing how the story goes that character can't be used at this time. And so I'm just saying, it was really cool to see that, they did move things forward, but they also faithfully implemented things that made Final Fantasy VII's combat good.
And they stayed pretty true to the original story, which I think is important. I actually like the story of Final Fantasy VII.
I do
more than most Final Fantasy stories, and it still resonates in 2020, which I was kind of worried about, but I think it's evil corporations. There's plenty of them in 2020. So
yeah, I'm pretty intrigued by that because I like what this group is doing, but I'm also like, well, you're still a bunch of eco-terrorists. Your motives are pure, but I don't know how you're going to square this away. I mentioned in an earlier segment how I feel about narrative in games, and what I look for, what stands out to me is when games fuse storytelling with gameplay and audio visuals,
environmental design, right?
Harness all the elements of a video game that are unique to video games. What I love about the combat system and being able to switch between characters, speaking to the bond you feel with this group. Before, if you're only controlling Cloud, or if you're only controlling the protagonist of Final 15, you tend to feel closer to that character because you spend most of your time controlling them. In this case, I've gotten pretty adept at switching characters, at switching party members on the fly, and that really kind of makes me feel closer to them because I feel like we all banded together to pull something off, even though it was really just me, Monday morning quarterback guy. And I think that sort of fusion is really cool. I almost look at this as like, as much as I do admire the construction and system design of turn-based combat, I don't think this game and the story could have been fully realized with a more traditional JRPG type combat system. I think real time does a lot to facilitate your relationships with these characters as you play.
Yeah, you're not waiting around nearly as much as you did in the original games, which is great. I love that.
And to TJ's point, like all the characters, all the four ones you can play, they all feel differently. Like they all have a different speed when they move, when they dodge, how they attack, and their attack animation. So like, it's not just like a turn-based game where they all have one attack and they all do the same thing. Like they all feel incredibly different when you control them individually. Like almost like a fighting game. Just they all have their own unique moveset.
Oh yeah, like Tifa is so fun to play to me. Like I wondered how they'd implement their beat system from the original to the remake, and just like the way that they put it, where one of her specials goes into another special, is just like it tickles the fighting game fan inside of me.
Yeah, no, it's it's really well done overall. And I liked how they brought some of the ancillary characters to the forefront more, fleshed them out, and especially with what is it, Wedge, Jesse, and Biggs. Yeah.
Wait, it sounds like you're gonna vote for it, Blake.
No, I'm not.
Whoa!
I think Blake might have a different choice.
Ghost of Tsushima is so super fucking awesome, and it happened to come out this year. As much as I love the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, it just like, it hit all the right notes for me. I love samurais. I love Kurosawa films. I love the Batman Arkham Asylum games, and like there's a lot of similarities between a lot of the functions and features.
And does that game nail the atmosphere or what? Like the atmosphere of like feudal Japan. It's just like, so I love the showdown mechanic. The idea of like just
showdowns are so badass.
Yes.
And
so
as that
badass.
expands,
like,
as you expand that, like I had a moment where like I was able to do a showdown, and then I had armor that would set it up and other things that I could kill more people afterwards with counterattack. Like, you know, people would come up like trying to attack you afterwards, and you could do a one-hit kill.
That's what I wondered, if you could expand that, because I've won all of them so far, and I'm like, man, if I could just like chain this into some, I think it's the Arkham Knight style, like instant takedowns, a seamless flow. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, no, there were totally moments where like I've completely obliterated like a raiding party just by using that showdown technique. Yeah, and then like later on you get other abilities that give you like really cool sort of a berserker mode that you can do cool stuff with. But not only is the story compelling, a lot of the side stories are compelling. A lot of the side characters that you work with have great stories that kind of tie in to old Kurosawa films here and there. The samurai duels are freaking epic. When two samurai face off like in like a, you know, combat arena, that plays into the story a lot as well.
I have to say, Blake, speaking to your point about the story, and I alluded to this earlier, Ghost of Tsushima might have the best intro or prologue chapter I've ever played. Like the transition from watching this showdown between the samurai and the Mongols to like storming onto the beach behind your uncle, like cutting down other warriors. Man, I was in for a penny, in for a pound, like right there. It was awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been so long since there's been a good samurai game, and most of them are like fighting games like Bushido Blade or something like that, or Budokan, like
Samurai Showdown.
Yeah, that's a little more cartoony, but
it's got samurais.
It does have samurais, and it is the showdown. I do love Samurai Showdown as well. Galford is my main in that game, but I'm talking about Ghost of Tsushima. I feel like it hit like all the same things for me that Final Fantasy VII Remake did, but it actually, I felt like I had a much broader experience of emotions with Ghost of Tsushima. Frankly, I feel like I felt like anger and sadness when I was playing Final Fantasy VII, and I felt that stuff when I was playing Ghost of Tsushima, but I also felt like tranquility. Like I mentioned in one of our other deliberations that like there were some story arcs that like hit close to home for me. It just I connected with Ghost of Tsushima on another level, and I think like games don't really offer you write freaking haikus. You sit and you meditate and you write haikus, and I can't think of another game that gives you like a peaceful, tranquil experience like that feels good and fits in within the structural narrative of the game like that. The use of wind instead of
I wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, an online map works extremely well. And like the different colors of all the leaves in the different areas you go to, chasing foxes to find shrines, petting the foxes. I don't know, all the different samurai outfits you can open up and collect, all the different like cosmetics for your weaponry. Look, it all looks absolutely stunningly gorgeous, and there's even talking about the story, there's just more story to tell even beyond your own story, and it makes me feel Yojimbo is my favorite Kurosawa movie, and it's about a wandering Ronin samurai that just kind of goes from town to town, and the movie is mostly about him tricking two local gangs into fighting each other to death. But like I still got that feeling of being like a wandering Ronin in Japan during like the era of samurai, and I can't get it. I love it. It's great. And then they added multiplayer. They added like some awesome multiplayer. It wasn't just like a tacked on thing. Like the raiding castles with friends is fun. There's a new raid system that I haven't checked out yet, but I've heard good things about that. So it just kept going. It kept going even beyond the story. Like Final Fantasy VII, you play it, it's great, you're done, move on. Ghost of Tsushima, I'm going to be going back to that game.
But you could always help Chadley with more important research.
Fuck Chadley. Chadley can suck it.
Wow.
Yeah, we're trying to make a case for Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, Chadley. That's just
Chadley.
Yeah, there you go. They got Chadley, not Game of the Year.
I'm here to throw in chaos into this mix.
I have to go back and see if Chadley was
Chadley's like a grenade I just threw into the discussion.
Yeah.
I have to actually go back and see if Chadley was a con in our review, because if he wasn't, we fucked up.
I have to say,
Greg, did you mention Chadley as a con in that review?
I don't think I said as a con. I just said he's an NPC that sells you materia.
He's not there. He's not there in the con list.
I got important research to do
not
for,
hate him, but I did not like him.
for the Shinra Corporation, guys.
I'll give you my Dragon Ball if you fight for old Chadley.
Let
me watch you.
I have very few criticisms about Ghost of Tsushima. I think it's an excellent game. I think the gameplay is fantastic. I love Sucker Punch games, just in general. I think they're fun. They have a really good balance of like designing an open world but making it accessible. And I think, like you mentioned with the wind mechanic, they did a really good job of keeping the HUD not as busy, which I think a lot of open world games fail at, because it's such a beautiful world. You want to see it.
Yeah, and it's also cool because it's supposed to be your father's spirit guiding you on your quest.
That's cool.
Yeah,
but
that's fucking cool.
But
I
don't like how you basically shit all over the samurai code in the first 5 minutes of the game.
That's
and I know it's like ends up being part of the story, but boy, I didn't like that. I don't like dishonoring the samurai code.
It's well pushed. The reason why you do.
Yeah.
I think the narrative makes it make sense.
No, I agree. I noticed that too, and I actually looked it up. I looked up the samurai code because it bothered me as well when that happened. But the narrative does push it in the sense of like, there's a few times early on where they're very predictable, and because they're very predictable, they're defeated and they have to evolve. But the thing that I started to notice, I really liked, like what David said, like the first hour, maybe 2 hours, I was like totally all in. But I actually started to find that I started to feel like I was playing a little bit of Assassin's Creed at one point. the gameplay wise, I mean, I know that there's lots of things that set it apart from Assassin's Creed in terms of gameplay. Like that's not like a dominating factor, but there were a couple reminders in there where I was like, oh, okay.
See,
this feels a little bit of Assassin's Creed to me.
I think you need to think about the Batman games more than you need to think about the Assassin's Creed games when it comes to Ghost of Tsushima.
Or Infinite.
I'll tell you what I think about, and this is like an ongoing problem with most open world games to me. Most open world games to me get boring very fast, and they do so because of what I like to call video game chores, which is just like an overload of menial tasks that deter me from like the course I'm taking and just seem like annoying. Like, why am I doing this? Does this matter? I don't care. It's something that I think slogs down a good, and I'm being conservative here, 80% of open world games in general, and it drives me crazy, and it's why I don't complete most games like that. Ghost of Tsushima is as good at staying away from that as another game that I actually 100%, and that's Horizon Zero Dawn. I feel like Horizon Zero Dawn and Ghost of Tsushima are incredibly good at making the diversions that it presents you with matter, and like giving you a good reason to pursue them.
Yeah.
The side characters in Ghost of Tsushima and their missions have sometimes mattered to me more than the main quest itself.
But beyond the narrative, there are also functional reasons to complete the tales.
Yeah.
Like, you know, adding the blacksmiths and stuff. Like, so that's the thing. I was like, I don't know if I care about this. And they're like, blah, 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 blacksmith. And I felt like a dog and a human who just said treat. I was like, you know, like, oh,
I need one of those. Yeah.
I mean, but that's part of the main narrative. But there are stories and quests, like the side quest that I told you about, like where like it's like dealing with like an elderly person going through dementia and stuff like that. You know.
See, I think
like
there's like I agree with you, TJ, and I'm a big open world fan. It's probably my favorite game type. But I also don't like most of them. And it's for that reason. And I think that there's two ways that they can avoid that. Number one is you need to feel like what you're doing is somehow connected to your purpose in the game. So whatever you're doing, it shouldn't just be something to make you spend that 100 or 150 hours. It should be something that actually has an impact on your journey, and you should care about it. So there's that. But what Blake was saying as well, like sometimes it doesn't have to necessarily be connected directly to your journey. It could just be a really good story. It could just be something you really want, like it's caught your interest and you want to see it all the way through. And I agree, like I noticed that as well early on, is like everything I was doing in Ghost of Tsushima felt meaningful. It didn't feel like I was being asked to go grab, 12 sticks so that they could, make me, I don't know, so I could learn how to make a
Another thing I just really want to note really quick is, Bill, you brought up Bushido. This game takes place in a time before Bushido was really a thing, and Bushido codes were varied, and there wasn't really a lot of consistency to them. It was just more like samurais would define these codes for themselves, and then they would write books about them and like spread their idealisms. Because some Bushido codes are like, you've got to be very well dressed, you have to like have your fingernails trimmed, you have to smell like rose petals. Other ones are like, you're a berserker, take on everybody, kick everybody's butt. It's like the difference between Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do, they're different. It's all karate, but they're approaching it from different angles, and that's how it was with Codes of Bushido.
Yeah, that didn't bother me. Like I said, it was.
But
a couple of the gameplay moments bothered me, but not because of that. That wasn't my issue.
Yeah.
I'd also like to point out that in the very first 5 minutes of the game, there is a guy that's like, "Be honorable. Send your honorable warrior out to fight me honorably. Let's fight honorably and protect honor." And they light that dude on fire.
Yeah, that's right there. That communicates like, all right, we're gonna have to color outside the lines a little bit if we want to survive here. I thought that was I thought that was great. Yeah,
it was a good way of introducing the fact that they were saying like you're actually going to have to, be a little bit more creative with your approach here.
I'm not saying to get off the horse. I'm not saying it's a bad story. I'm saying that it made me uncomfortable to have to.
That's fair.
Throw away the honor code that
As
quickly.
us as assassinating people. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I was like, I didn't sign up for this. I thought I was going to just be a badass.
This is war,
it's moments
sir.
of desperation.
That's
It's
what,
about
that's the
it's
thing.
about what you do when you're desperate. Does his honor matter as much as saving his people? And that's the big conflict right
That's
there.
a theme in the
throughout
game too. It's
Yeah.
a major theme they pull up
Yeah.
in the game as
Mhm.
well.
And it ruins, it destroys everything that he is destroyed and reborn in this game.
Mhm.
And I that's a big part of it, and it works really well. And the way that it ties into the overall narrative, I think if you finish the game and you keep going further, you start to understand, like, this is like, maybe you feel like it's a decision that was made lightly in the game, but the more you play, you realize, like, no, this guy is desperate to save his people,
and to
he
Asa's
is
point,
willing to
like,
sacrifice his honor to do it.
Yeah, I think to Asa's point, like, you're definitely supposed to feel that discomfort.
Yeah.
Because this is like, I mean, I love how the flashbacks are done. Like the first time you touch your sword, you flash back to you or your uncle teaching you.
Mhm.
And this is like, obviously, like, here's a guy who's had tradition ingrained into him and who's gonna squirm a lot because he's gonna have to eschew that tradition. And I really dug that. It made me feel like and it continues to make me think about how I want to approach things. Like, I always do the showdown in part because I want to, like, announce myself. You know, I feel like that's a bit more honorable. But again, what I look for in a narrative is that integration of traditional storytelling with video game elements, and I'm really digging Ghost of Tsushima in that regard.
And a lot of times you get that choice. Not every level gives you the choice of being stealth or being aggressive. But for the most part, the game kind of lets you play it how you want it. Of course, there are a few levels where you got to be a sneaky sneak or something.
Also, when you start, like, he is bad at assassinations, and you like you feel like that gurgly, horrible jank of him just like not being suited to this style of combat.
So, speaking of that, one last point I want to mention. I love the combat systems in this game. I think they're really, really well implemented, and it kind of drove home what I did not like about Sekiro last year. I love that Sekiro integrated tutorials. Like, you know, TJ, you could go to that practice dummy and kind of practice any combat style, any weapon type. But the problem is the game felt a little inconsistent with its combat rules and mechanics in a way that previous FromSoft games did not. Now, this is, you know, and you and I have talked about this, Sekiro is not a Souls-like. It is a Tenchu style game. But there is a certain expectation, considering that, like, FromSoft going forward, I feel is going to always implement some Soulsborne systems in their games. The rules for combat in Sekiro seemed very fluid in a way that frustrated the hell out of me. Ghost of Tsushima does not feel that way at all. I feel like the combat controls are very tight. They're very intuitive. They are rules, and as long as I follow them, I am successful. I've gotten really good at pairing, especially different weapon types, like spears, which were just a pain in the ass to deal with. Any long polearm spear style weapon in Sekiro just a lot of times felt a little broken at the worst, unfair at best to me.
Yeah.
And Ghost of Tsushima, I have no complaints. It's not easy. I can't game the system, but I do have to pay attention. However, as long as I follow the rules, my patience and my practice and my knowledge of the combat system is rewarded. And I really, really dig that. I feel like it's the best evolution of the Arkham-style combat I've seen so far. Like, I love that countering is a little different. I love that flowing between stances and just takedowns and that sort of thing is different. It's really the first game I've played with that style of system that hasn't just felt loosely copy and pasted from, like, Arkham City or Arkham Knight, and I really, really dig that.
Agreed. And I do like that it's like, I agreed on most of the things specifically regarding Ghost of Tsushima. I feel like it's spelled out for you a little bit more than Sekiro is. I feel like Sekiro follows the From Software rhetoric of sometimes you just have to be killed by it to understand what you're dealing with. Which
it just felt like the more I learned in Sekiro, the more I found that it didn't really apply because it's the rules sometimes. And again, it's not a Soulsborne game, but like Soulsborne games are a lot more consistent in that way. And I just feel like there are enough parallels between Ghost of Tsushima and Sekiro that I'm enjoying Ghost of Tsushima more because of them. And I do think you're right. Like Ghost of Tsushima definitely spells things out in a way that From Software probably will never spell them out. Never has and never will. And that's fine. That's what it does. But it's the consistency that I appreciate, regardless of whether a game spells them out or whether I pick them up during gameplay, as you do in FromSoft games. They're just, Ghost of Tsushima feels a lot more consistent, which I think is important.
Yeah, and yeah, I would agree with that. And I also feel like that I really enjoy, much like Horizon Zero Dawn, that Ghost of Tsushima sort of allows you to choose the way you go about a lot of things, especially in the way you level up. You can choose to take the more, like, there are going to be points where you have to use stealth, but you can also deck Gen out to be like full frontal combat, like, and like, or you can deck him out to just be like the sneakiest, most devious gadget using ninja that he can be. And I kind of like that. And about like when I played through Horizon Zero Dawn, my brother was playing through it at the same time as me, and we used entirely different methods to approach everything in that game. And I feel like that's something that you can also do in Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling that way too. I'm going a lot into parrying, because as soon as they, like, you can parry, I'm like, oh shit, this is my jam right here. I'm really digging that. I just unlocked water style. I'm unlocking a bunch of stuff. I love how you kind of have to think on your feet. It kind of feels like, again, to call to another Soulsborne, a Souls-like, Ghost of Tsushima has a much cleaner method of switching stances than Neo, which was a game I really wanted to like but did not, because a lot of it felt pretty janky and sloppy. So yeah, this game is really hitting all my buttons, and I'm just really, really digging it so far.
Yeah.
But wait, there's more games that came out on PS4.
Cool. Well, let's just vote though.
No, Josh. Josh, I imagine you want to speak to this game.
All right, Josh, tell me.
Yeah, if he doesn't, I will.
I do. I don't have much hope in it winning anything or taking anything away, just because I feel like the majority of people here just don't really give a shit about it. Just being completely blunt. But I think you guys are missing out. I think it's a great game. The Last of Us 2 has seen a lot of controversy since the first leaks and then the subsequent release and everything. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding the game. And I think that seeing that amount of controversy kind of speaks to the weight of the choices made in the story and kind of the direction that Neil Druckmann and Naughty Dog, that the team took with The Last of Us 2 to kind of pull it out of the shadow of the first game and make it stand on its own. And Ghost of Tsushima is a beautiful game. It's a great game, has a lot of great components to it. Final Fantasy VII Remake, fantastic game as well, really, really pretty. But I think that out of all the games I've ever played on the PlayStation 4, the game that really makes the most and then pushes past what the PS4 can do is The Last of Us Part 2. The graphics are just immeasurable compared to anything else I've seen on the PS4. The guttural feeling of stabbing your knife into someone's throat, like the sound design, the camera angles, everything about it helps drive home this cinematic experience that a lot of people were talking about with Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I think that The Last of Us 2 does it better because it is this story that you're there for the ride. You're playing this part, and there's really not much you can do to change it, but it's that interactivity that puts you into Ellie's shoes and into the shoes of this other character that we never named because spoilers. And I think that Naughty Dog did such a good job putting you in those characters' shoes and kind of making you see like things from their perspective. Like, I know a lot of people talk about The Last of Us 2, like glorifying just murdering endless amounts of people and like it not meaning anything. But it does. Like if you actually watch the cutscenes, it is not just endless murder without consequence. Like Ellie is breaking throughout the entire game, and it's so subtle. It's someone that has been raised by a piece of shit. I mean, Joel was a piece of shit. Like he was a garbage human being, and he raised Ellie. And what you see in that game is a direct result of the actions that he took and that she learned from, you know? And I think seeing the subtlety of her breaking, seeing her hand shaking, like in cutscenes after she's murdered someone, like in cold blood, honestly, for revenge, is just heartbreaking to see this character that was so innocent and full of life in the first game, just kind of broken down by the challenges that she's faced. And it's something that I think that they hit the nail on the head with it really, really, really well. And I think that there's just so many good parts that I can't really break down because of spoilers. But if you want a really beautiful game, like, yeah, Donovan, go ahead, Donovan.
I just want to speak to it too because it's probably my pick too. I don't think you can really talk about the PS4 generation of games without mentioning The Last of Us Part 2, but I think it's just such an expertly crafted game, like from every facet, from the writing, the graphics, like you mentioned, Josh, even the performances, the way they use the camera and the cinematics. I think the gameplay is amazing. We don't talk about it a lot, but I love the gameplay.
It's improved. It's improved from the first game, is it not? Just because there's so much more that Ellie can do, and just because there is so much more that Ellie can do, it ratchets up the tension a little bit because you're suddenly running a lot more. You're suddenly having to like escape these bad situations, and
it does.
There's more that she can do that Joel can't in the first game. So there's a lot more possibility there.
I think they still have it's subtle, but I mean they still have those horror elements. There's parts of The Last of Us Part 2 that are straight up scary as hell, which is it's great to still have that. It's not just all action adventure. And then like you said, Josh, like just Ellie's transformation from the first game, which is like 7 or 8 years before, to this, where in the first one she's like the shimmering beacon of hope or the only positivity in that story, and then in the second one she's a monster. Like Ellie's literally become a monster by the end of that campaign, and it's the last game I played that once I wrote credits, it just stuck with me for so long. Like weeks after, I was just asking people, did you beat the game yet? Because I just wanted to talk about it with somebody, which isn't an effect that I've had from I don't think any other game I've played this year. So
yeah, I mean I agree. I don't think any game has really like made me want to talk about it as much as The Last of Us 2 did. Like I mean I remember messaging David someone being like, hey, you know, how far along are you? Like trying to gauge where he was so that we could talk about certain things. And like, there's just so much about it that works so well that the developers got shit on for because it wasn't what people wanted. And like, I get that maybe it wasn't the story that people wanted, but I think that in the world that Naughty Dog created in the first game, this brutal, unforgiving world where, you know, every day could be your last day. I think that they just did so well about taking this character and expanding it and just showing the transformation. And it's not all for naught. Like, it's not like Joel was a bad person in those 7 to 8 years between the games. Like there's a lot of backstory there that we won't really get into that does a good job of like he's actually trying, but in the end it's actions come back to haunt you. This endless cycle of violence costs something. And in some people's cases it costs them everything. And I think that The Last of Us 2 does such a good job of painting that picture. Yes, it's brutal, it's intense, it's honestly like, it's the first time I've probably ever said that a game was trying to play, but it be a good thing. Like pushing myself to finish it and play through it. Like it wasn't a bad thing. It's just like, it was a lot to take in. Yeah, and it's just, I don't know, like it's so hard to properly explain what makes The Last of Us so like part 2 so good.
There's a lot of intangibles in there that really have to be experienced.
Yeah. I mean, even if you don't do anything but watch like the movie version or whatever on YouTube with all the cutscenes, like just experience the story for yourself. Mm-hmm. Because that's what the game is about. The gameplay is great. Like, it's fun. It's hard-hitting.
I enjoyed the gameplay in 2 a lot more than I did in 1. I will say that.
Yeah. I don't think I've played any game, like even games like Destiny that have great gunplay. Like, I don't think I've ever played any game where the weapons like feel so good to hit someone with. Like melee attacks and like the sound that your arrow makes when you shoot it and it stabs through someone's back or something like that. Like, all of those moments just kind of culminate together along with the story to create this. I've been saying brutal because, like, I just don't have a thesaurus in front of me and I can't think of any other word that really properly describes it, because it is. Like, it is. Visceral. Yeah, visceral is a good way to say it too. Yeah. Those are like 2 of the most overused terms when it comes to games like this, I think, but like there's just no other way to really properly explain it. Like, it's just a one-of-a-kind experience, and I praise Naughty Dog for, like, they could have gone the easy route. They could have given fans exactly what they wanted and probably would have still had Game of the Year, like, contendership with it because of the fan base, but they didn't. They took a step out of the fan base's comfort zone. They took chances. The game was like, the big plot of the game was leaked like 6-7 months in advance.
About that.
And even knowing that big plot twist, like, that moment still hit so hard for me when I experienced it myself. Like, that's how good it was done. Like, it wasn't just halfway done and thrown in there just as shock and awe.
I have a question, Josh, about the game. I'll put it to everyone who's played through it. I haven't played through it. I've watched all the meaningful parts that you're talking about. I just didn't feel like playing it. I didn't have the time. Yeah. Is this game fun?
I think it's fun. I do. I think there are parts of it that are intense and are grueling, but I think, like, overall, like, to see the character progression is fun. At least
also, I think that certain aspects of it can be fun with the gameplay. Like I mentioned, I think the combat's great. So I don't know. I mean, I guess, like, for example, like a scenario when you have to, like, clear a house of, like, bandits and there's zombies and you attract them to the house and they tear each other apart. That's fun. Like, that's a fun thing to do. But overall, I mean, I wouldn't say I was having fun when the credits rolled, but I think it has moments.
Yeah, it's just that compared to the other 2 nominees we have in this category, I think Ghost of Tsushima is a lot of fun. I think Final Fantasy VII is a lot of fun, but they don't talk about these topics and these themes that Josh has mentioned at all, really. That I think, like, any good revenge story, it's going to be hard to be fun when you're being, like, vindictive,
or at least it should
bordering on evil, right? Like, Ellie's whole turn in this game from being, like, kind of a softer, gentler character in 1 to evil in this one at times.
Yeah, just unforgiving and just absolutely, like, unwilling to compromise in any way. Like, she has murder on her mind and, like, that's it. Like, that's all that matters is that these people die. Like, that's it. Doesn't matter the cost.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what captures, like, that kind of story so well, is because you can't properly have a revenge story without the character being willing to walk through hell, literally, no matter what, to get what they want.
It's just such a great character study. I just don't remember the last time I've seen a game that was just such a good character study like that, just to watch what revenge can do to a person, how somebody can just be so consumed with a vengeance that it literally rots them from, like, the inside out, and to just watch that unfold throughout the narrative is just pretty really excellent.
I'd like to speak to part also brought up about, is the game fun or whatever. And I'm not directly comparing Last of Us 2 to anything specific, but, like, movies and TV shows, there's lots of them that can definitely be fun, or that's the reason you go in or whatever. But, like, it's cliche now, but, I love the series The Wire. But
Yeah.
you could not say that I'm gonna watch. People don't sit down and watch that and go through for the sake of having fun, I guess.
Sure.
And there's different ways, to go through. And I'd also like to piggyback on the rest of everything that Donovan and Hawkins have said about Last of Us 2 and add in that the attention to detail, the way things are presented to the game, the direction, the animations, more so than any other game I've played this year, any of the ones we've brought up. It doesn't feel so much like you have a 3D polygon character spinning around inside the world, right? It feels like they're more connected to what it is. The small little animations like walking up to cars, putting the hand on the car, subtly interacting with borders, characters, the visceral feeling of the combat, the way, stabbing weapons go in and out of people. It all feels like one conjoined thing that feels to me like it's orders of magnitude over the other direct competitors we're talking about, other games, even best in class. The way that you can pick up information from looking at characters' faces, small ticks on the face and stuff, is just exponentially more impressive than stuff you see either in Spider-Man, Ghosts, Zero Dawn was another game that was brought up earlier. They're different games. A lot of those are more straight open world, and this one's more focused, so they can't afford to do some of that. But I feel like it's just another jump. I remember back when the first time I played Half-Life 2, and they had the 3D character faces that actually could start to have the beginnings of emotes, where you would see Alex's eyes veer to the side when she was rolling her eyes or whatever else. And this feels just like the best example of this that we've got here. There's so many things that can be said without having the exact thing explicitly said out loud, which I feel like is something that happened a lot during the time I was playing Ghost of Tsushima and some of these other games. Not to say that they're garbage because they don't do that or anything, but just whether I like the narrative or not. Yeah, it's just everything. It felt like everything didn't have to be exactly surface value or directly saying what you felt or what you were doing in a way. I guess I'm doing a good job explaining probably. But
I think that one of the things that The Last of Us 2 had going against it was the timing. I don't know. I didn't really feel like playing a game about humanity being wiped out in a global pandemic in the middle of a global pandemic.
That's a great point.
So I don't think that The Last of Us 2 did anything wrong, but I think one of the reasons why it didn't shine as brightly for a lot of people was because everyone's dealing with the reality of a pandemic.
And
this year.
Not only just the pandemic. I agree with you. I think The Last of Us 2 was horribly time released. I mean, obviously, Naughty Dog couldn't have predicted the coronavirus, but that game did get delayed, and it came out in June, which was right after this.
Right,
like we were getting really into the thick of this thing, and it was not only the pandemic. Obviously, The Last of Us is about a zombie outbreak, but also just the beaten down, sad, depressed tone of that game from beginning to end. It's like I can't blame somebody that back in June that was like, I don't need to play this right now. I couldn't blame somebody that would have rather played like a Final Fantasy or even like a Fall Guys or anything else than this.
That was kind of my point with my question.
It was a really heavy game to have during a very heavy time.
It was kind of tough to motivate myself to play it.
Yeah,
I was like, I'll just let Josh review it. And
this franchise has asked that question since the first one, and I think it's valid because this is really, both of these games are great conversation starters for our game's art, and I think games certainly can be. They don't have to be. But certainly The Last of Us 1 and 2 kind of drive home the idea that just because this is a quote-unquote game doesn't mean it's fun. And also maybe video game isn't the right term for some of these things. And there's a lot to explore there. But
I go back to this one moment in GTA 5, and if you haven't gotten to this part of GTA 5 now, it's your fault. Like, that game's been out for 1,000 years, and it's on every platform. It's probably even on Stadia.
It's on its third generation of console.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, you've had plenty of time to get to this part. Like, you've had plenty of time. But that scene where Trevor has to torture the dude to get information out of him. Games don't always have to be fun. But that moment made me feel something. And I feel like The Last of Us Part 2 does that too. Where it's not necessarily fun, but it makes you feel something. And that speaks to the whole video games being art sometimes, or more dramatic at times, or not necessarily just happy-go-lucky all the time. You don't always have to be Mario. You can be darker. And I think that's kind of what Josh's point was about the narrative.
I mean, it's like I said before, like it's really hard to properly make an argument, at least for me, for The Last of Us 2, because to be quite honest with you, my favorite part of the game isn't when you play as Ellie.
Yeah, I know.
Ellie's a great character. They do a great job with her, but like that's not the best part of the game. The best part of the game is when you're playing as the other character and you're seeing everything from that side. Like Naughty Dog takes and they spoon feed you this. These people are bad. You hate these people. Kill them all. And then they rip that out of your mouth like as you're about to swallow it and are like, oh no. But what if they really weren't that bad? What if you actually maybe kind of liked them somewhat? And like it just completely turns the story on its head. It turns the narrative a complete 360 degree turn.
I think you mean 180.
Yeah, it's 180.
Yeah, it's like
no, it's a complete 360 degree turn.
Like back right where you started then.
It's that many turns. Like it just completely like spins you around and you don't know what the heck is going on. And it was going into those first bits playing as that other character. I held on to this hate for this character. I was like, no, I'm not gonna like this guy. I don't care how much they try to make me like this character. I'm not going to. And then seeing from that character's perspective as Ellie dismantles everything that they know, all of their friends, like it's heartbreaking. And like it really just kind of opens your eyes to the other side of things, you know? Like it takes what makes you think of this story as like, oh yeah, there's a good and evil side. It's like there's really not. Like there's just us. There's no good, there's no bad, there's just
people.
The Last of Us 2.
No, there's people and there's elements of good and evil in all people. I think
one of the things I don't see anybody talking about is like how, I mean, the narrative, Josh, is amazing. Like you have my vote hands down for best narrative, hands down, like no argument. Like that game story is fantastic. And while narrative is a crucial part of any game, I feel that the only place where Last of Us is weak is in its core gameplay. I watched the whole playthrough and I couldn't stop watching. That's how good the story was. I couldn't stop watching. But when the player died, like in a scene where he's running from the infected, or when he had to sneak and got killed by infected, when he got shot by a guy, the whole thing just screeches to a halt as you're trying to figure out how to get past these things. And I think it's the only thing that's really bad about the game is some of the long corridors or the segments when you're infiltrating just cause the story to come to a screeching halt if you're not figuring out how to do it right, if you're not playing it correctly. And I think that's the only thing that is bad about the game is and that's not every section, just some sections, just the gameplay just drags and you're like, I want to get to the next point of the story, and you have to sneak past these 10 people first. You're like, fuck you, I just want to get to the next point of the story.
Yeah, but if you can't die, then there are no odds, there are no, you know.
I think what Greg is saying is the point is if the story is driving force, then just let me get to the story, which I think is a valid criticism.
I agree.
I think that comes down to preference. I mean, I played them back to back, so I never played the original, so I did 1 and immediately started 2. And for me, the gameplay on all facets just felt like a huge step up because it was, but that was just me. But there's one more thing on The Last of Us 2 I wanted to get to that no one's brought up yet, is what this game did with accessibility. Accessibility has gained so much traction in games over the last couple of years, and when I was loading up The Last of Us 2 for the first time, I was like astonished at just how many accessibility options there are in that game. Like it's menus and menus of options for lightings, controls, aiming, visuals, just so much in there, which is really impressive to see.
Yeah, there are complete settings that turn the game to like this mode that allows visually impaired players to play through it and experience it without having to worry about getting lost in these dark corridors and stuff like that and not being able to see what's going on the screen. And like that, the level of accessibility is something that I would love to see all developers in the future strive for. I've seen some
good accessibility options in Ghost of Tsushima as well, in terms of like making the wind thicker and in terms of aim assist and that sort of thing. So
Yeah,
we're starting to see a little make traction a little bit more.
Yeah, sure.
It's not a PlayStation game, but we saw Grounded ship with some really good accessibility features in early access too.
Yeah, I'm glad this is becoming a thing now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good thing to see a lot more developers like pushing into.
But it's really important for a big AAA title like The Last of Us Part 2 to ship with that kind of robust set of accessibility settings.
Yeah, I mean, it opened up the game to like an entire like community that wouldn't have been able to play it otherwise. Like that's just insane.
I mean, you know, I feel like a lot of what you've been saying about Last of Us 2, I feel very similar about the narrative in Ghost of Tsushima. I don't think it was as brutal or impactful, but at the same time, the gameplay was also there for me too. So I think if we're making an argument for a game of the year, I'm gonna encourage people to go towards Ghost of Tsushima because I think it hit on both of those levels rather than just hitting on one of them.
I think we're almost ready to vote, but
I'm ready to vote. I've been ready to vote since I started arguing about Ghost of Tsushima.
Before that, I want to speak to The Last of Us too. Ozzy, what did you want to say?
I was going to mention a few quick honorable mentions that obviously aren't going to win because this is looking more and more like a three-horse race.
Because this isn't taking long at all. Let's just bring in people that aren't going to win.
Is this for MILF Morales?
No. I'm talking about that later. Although that is technically a PS4 game. No. I was just going to make a quick honorable mention to Spelunky, Dreams, and Fall Guys. But those aren't going to win, so let's just move on.
Yeah,
David, go ahead.
All right. Those are great PC games that you brought up, Ozzy.
So, what? Dreams isn't on PC.
Dreams is not on PC, though. I'll give you that.
And Dreams
that game needs a mouse.
Yeah, Dreams really needs a mouse badly. But yeah, it does seem like it's a three-horse race here. David, you wanted to speak to The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah, I went into this on another segment, but I have to say I loved the first The Last of Us. Not because of Joel or Ellie, but because of Joel and Ellie and the rapport they built together and also with the player. I have to say that I went from this was Last of Us 2 was one of my most anticipated games of the year to when you brought it up, Josh, and maybe it's just the point we're at in these deliberations, but I was like, oh yeah, that did come out. I think it's a little dismissive and disingenuous. I'm not saying you meant to be this way, to say that people who are kind of just overlooking this game because they didn't appreciate or didn't get what the developer was trying to do. I got it. In fact, I think that like the twist that happens with the second character to me isn't a twist because this other character was looking for Joel specifically, and so that's pretty indicative of like she's out. This character, he, she, they are out for revenge, and it obviously is because of the first game, which you would have to figure because again, Joel is a piece of shit. But this game is about moral relativism, and I think that what really brought that down for me was the gameplay. Mechanically, it is very refined. And I'm someone who I love the gameplay for what it was in The First of Us. You know, there were people who kind of knocked it for not being like the perfect form or the apotheosis of a stealth game or a horror game or a hybrid of both. But I think The Last of Us 2 system-wise is a lot better. But I think that this game really, really suffers from AAA bloat. I think it needed to be somewhat lengthy in order to do that perspective switch that you talked about, which I do think is very effective. But there were a lot of times when I felt like I was beating a dead horse or a dead human or dead cultist or whatever dead thing I was beating just into a paste. And I thought that caused its narrative and the points it was trying to make to lose a lot of their efficacy. It was almost like I was kind of rolling my eyes like, yes, this is brutal and savage and revenge and vengeance are bad. Can we just move on? It felt like at points this game was as long as it was because it's a AAA game and it needs to be so long before we ship. I think, you know, technically it is a masterpiece. What Naughty Dog has done with facial animations is just fantastic, to the point where now when I play games, I kind of notice the absence of it. I would even say there's some disparity between going from cutscenes in Final Fantasy VII to gameplay where somehow in gameplay, and I can't quite put my finger on it yet, but the graphics look a little less vivid and real to me than they do in the cinematics. It's slight, but it's there, at least to me. But The Last of Us really, I felt, belabored a lot of its points, to the point that it went beyond making them to circle back around and have me asking, like, wait, what's the point again? The other thing is, I wasn't looking to be Joel or Ellie, or Joel and Ellie, but I didn't connect with anyone in this game because I felt like it did a poor job of making me care about anyone. And I didn't care about this other character more than Ellie, because I felt like to do so would be missing the point, where they both should just really like talk it out or hug it out instead of perpetuating the cycle. I came to like Ellie in the first game through Joel, and the fact that you were there with them in lockstep from the moment they were introduced until the big, denouement at the end. And 2 just kind of missed the mark for me. Either I was with Ellie's new girlfriend, which I didn't have a problem with, but they get together in like the first 20 minutes. So they were kind of making these inside jokes that made me feel like a third wheel, like, haha, I don't really get it. Whereas everything in Joel and Ellie's rapport you get because you were there. You were there for it. And then sometimes, characters leave, sometimes other characters come in. And I think that those beats can be effective, but it just didn't feel as cohesive as the first game was to me. So I think that mechanically, like, the gameplay in this is still good, but it's almost better if you don't play it and instead just watch on YouTube, particularly if you're able to skip some of the gameplay sequences, because I think the pacing in this game is awful. I think there were times when I would do like 2 encounters in a row and I was like, yeah, that was awesome. I went from the infected to the humans and different types of gameplay. And then I had to do it again. And I'm like, man, I just kind of want to see what happens next. To the point where I was very, very busy this year, but I would make time. I would have made time for it if I was into it, but I just wasn't. And again, I was a super fan of the first one. I think it's one of the best games ever made. But for me, in every way, this game just really was. I don't think it's a bad game. It was a letdown for me, though.
Well, I mean, I think that speaks to what I brought up originally. Like, I wasn't saying that people didn't like get it or didn't understand it or anything like that, but there was a lot of hate and controversy around the game because of what they did. And you say, yeah, it's not something that, like, the plot twist wasn't that big of a plot twist. Yeah, it wasn't, but that was a big pushing point for the story. And it's what pissed off a lot of people, that particular part of the game. I agree, the game definitely ran a little long. I think there are parts that they could have trimmed down to make it a smoother experience. But I also think that it wasn't necessarily long because they had to meet a certain time length or anything like that. I think that it was legitimately just Naughty Dog wanting to tell the story and not wanting to compromise on what they included in it.
It's just tough for video games to do that, though, because, like, I see where you're coming from, but the thing is it's if this were a movie, I'm not saying it would work, but, like, you would only have to kill so many things or do the same thing more than once, so many times. Whereas in this, it did get repetitive to the point where I felt it interfered with the story. I like that, as you said, you kind of do feel more and more disgusting as you're going along, and I get that. But I went from that to feeling like I don't even feel disgusting anymore. I just kind of want to stop doing the same thing and do something else and have a break and have another cutscene or, some walk and talk moments, which I think the game does do pretty well. But I thought that the first one did better because there was this really finely paced growth between these 2 characters.
Should we vote?
Yeah, man, I'd be down though. I'd be down too.
I believe it is time to vote.
What you got, TJ?
I was just gonna say, I think The Last of Us Part 2 could have possibly benefited from a point where the characters themselves outright say, hey, can we fucking not? That wasn't in the last, like, moment of the game.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay, let's vote.
I'll kick things off. I'm going to go with Ghost of Tsushima. It's tough because I really think Ghost and Final Fantasy VII are fucking great in almost every way, but Ghost is hitting all the right notes for me, so I'll go that one.
Okay, Greg, you're on Final Fantasy VII Remake, right?
I mean, I have to be.
Yeah, you're holding.
He's got the sword.
Sword. I have to be.
He's holding the sword.
I figure your prop was indicative of your vote. Okay, so there's 2 votes in. Ozzy, do you got a vote?
I like Ghost of Tsushima a lot, but Final Fantasy VII Remake is not only an awesome game, but I feel more connected to that fandom now. I totally am on their ship now, so yeah, I'm gonna go Final Fantasy VII Remake.
And now you're gonna be a Cloud main and Smash.
Can you pick stuff up while riding your horse in Final Fantasy? Oh
No,
wait,
you don't have to
you
ride
don't
a
even
horse
have
in
a
the game.
horse. You just got a chocobo.
You have a badass motorcycle.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
you ride on a
that's right.
train.
Not a horse picking up stuff.
You also wield a giant sword while riding said motorcycle.
Fair enough.
Steve, you got a vote?
Yeah, I think I'm going with Final Fantasy.
Okay. Blake, Ghost of Tsushima?
I swear I'm gonna find games that you all hate and make you review them. If Ghost of Tsushima doesn't fucking win this shit.
You
I
still have
swear
Best
to
Samurai
God.
game
But
up
Blake,
for
would you be
another-
mad if would you be mad at Final Fantasy 1? You love that game.
I did love it, but Ghost of Tsushima deserves it. Here's the thing: if you want nice things, you have to give them an award so they know that they need to make more of them.
Yeah,
Right,
it's the Half-Life
right.
Alex principle.
Right now, it's really close to call right now because we're about to get a few votes for Last of Us. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris,
I mean, forget it.
Chris, you voting for The Last of Us 2?
Pretty cool, but like Horizon Zero Dawn and a few other games, like after 7 or 8 hours, I just didn't give a shit anymore. I didn't want to do anymore.
Are you talking about Ghost of Tsushima?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, in the case of Last of Us, I did want to keep going, although I haven't finished, but I made much farther, so I'm gonna stick with that.
Okay. Donovan?
Last of Us 2 for me.
Josh?
Last of Us 2.
Okay.
what's
Bill.
the vote at right now, Asif?
3 for Final Fantasy, 3 for The Last of Us, 1 for Ghost of Tsushima.
Oh.
Or 2.
What?
Sorry, 2.
Two for Ghost-
Sorry,
two
2
for
for
Ghost
Ghost of Tsushima.
Oh, this is gonna get really close. Okay, go ahead.
I'm
TJ.
The Last of Us Part 2.
Oh wait, Bill just said The Last of Us?
Yeah.
TJ.
Bill, at 2? At 2, Bill.
What?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Ghost of Tsushima. It's really hard to make an open world game that keeps my attention for long periods of time. So that's impressive. That is entirely impressive to me.
This is one of those where I wish Sam wasn't abstaining, but here we are. Man.
He would have not wanted to vote for Final Fantasy. He hates JRPGs in any way, shape, or form. So it would
Sam
Sam
hates
is-
PlayStation. I don't know what he would have voted for at all.
Sam
Oh,
is
yeah.
such a C word.
He's
Well,
not here. So
That's true. He doesn't have a PlayStation. He
Congenial?
can't vote.
you want your vote to count, you gotta vote. This is tough.
gotta fight for your.
Because,
right.
like, on one hand, I've actually played some of Ghost of Tsushima. I've played Final Fantasy Remake. I've watched all of these games played. Especially The Last of Us Part 2, because we did a lot of video work for that on the site.
So that's why you're voting for MILF Morales.
Milk
No.
Morales.
We'll get to that
I'm-
soon.
Nobody mentioned Chadley.
Chadley's the main reason why I'm not voting for
Damn
Oh,
it!
that's a damn shame.
Damn it!
But these are all excellent games. But I really think that I think Josh, you made a really good case for The Last of Us.
Oh, right. Let's give it to the game.
That's a damn shame
Nobody
because
played.
the narrative's great, but the gameplay is not so great.
Is this actually the first award
That's a
we've
damn
given
shame.
to The Last of Us?
It is, and
It
it's
is.
barely.
Let's
but
give it.
it's the combination of what Chris said about the level of detail in the game, what Josh said about the narrative, and Donovan, someone who hadn't even played the series, coming into it and it resonating with him. The fact that, like, it could be a game that isn't fun, and that all three of these people are sitting here saying, no, this is like one of the most important games to come out this year. There were things in
Absolutely, in
Ghost
terms
of
of
Tsushima
narrative.
that I flat out didn't like. I didn't like the breaking of the honor code. I didn't like the side mission where it's like, save my family, and then you get there and they're dead. I'm like, this is like
Hey, spoiler alert.
That it's so early in the game. It's not even a spoiler.
They might get better.
Like,
I mean,
I got to that point and I was like, no, I'm not gonna play a game that makes me feel this shitty. Like I fought through all of this.
Oh my God, really?
That's
and here they're talking about a game that makes you feel like total shit for going around and murdering people in cold blood.
Did they ever say it made them feel like shit?
I thought that.
Yeah.
I thought that Josh was saying like he felt
You definitely should. You definitely should feel like shit.
You don't feel like shit. You look at Ellie feeling like shit. The way that the narrative works,
depending on how you immerse yourself in a game.
Having a game that makes me feel like shit is preferable than a game that has me feeling indifferent about every part of it.
There's that.
I'm sorry that you can't appreciate a beautiful, glorious, gorgeous game.
Of the wind, Pocahontas.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Blake. We got 5 votes here for The Last of Us Part 2.
Let's vote for the game that no one played. Great, cool.
I played it. I'll write about
Nobody voted for Spellbreak in this vote.
Yeah, it's almost like Spellbreak. It's
great.
Spellbreak.
Oh, it's great.
Why did you say that?
I love that the game that nobody played and wasn't fun to play, according to people that did play it, is getting the award. Let's give it to The Last of Us 2. Great.
Spellbreak did win and nobody played it.
Great.
I played it. I like it.
Nobody. Did you play it this weekend?
Nobody liked the game.
I did not. No, this was my other stuff. No, I played Ghost of Tsushima this weekend.
Anyway.
Okay, the gameplay sucks, but it was a cool story, bro.
Anyway. Our best PS4 game of the year is The Last of Us Part 2. Congratulations to Naughty Dog. You are our best PS4 game of 2020, and there's nothing Blake can do about it.
A gun, they comfort me, because I know I'll kill my enemies when they come.